Let's talk about some data to see how shocking it is. So the first time in history, we're the sickest country in the world, and we have the sickest children in the world. In 2024, I mean, the year is almost over. We spent $4.7 trillion on healthcare spending. And that's approximately $14,200 per year per person. And the projection for 2028 is $7.5 trillion. That's 20% of our nation's GDP, just to put that in perspective. And here you can see on the left, from the 70s, till 2020, you can see that, chronic diseases, getting up and up. So we're getting sicker and sicker every year. But how is it possible? Because we have the best education, we have the best doctors, we have new medication coming out and vaccines, and yet we're getting sicker every year. So something is up here. And here, of course, America is by far, the most expensive healthcare system, because the money, to pay $4.7 trillion has to come from somewhere. And if you're wondering, why your premium goes up every year, this is the reason why. Followed by Germany, Sweden, Canada, France, and so on. All right, so let me repeat that, 75% of Americans have at least one chronic disease. That's 6 in 10 adults have at least one chronic disease. 4 in 10 have multiple chronic diseases. So if you ever asked yourself, why was America, why did it have the most COVID death? It's because of this. So many people already had multiple chronic diseases, and it didn't take much for a virus to come along and knock them out. And 70% of all deaths in America is caused because of chronic diseases. And the leading cause of all chronic diseases in America, as you might know, is heart disease, and cancer, followed by stroke, diabetes, chronic respiratory diseases, and so on. And here on the left, can see from the 90s, to 2015. You can see here in yellow is arthritis. Arthritis is skyrocketing, which is basically inflammation of the joints, which is caused mainly by, from sugar. The sugar consumption inflames the joints, gets the stiffness, and creates the pain, years after years. Then in purple, we have diabetes. The diabetes right now in the last few years is just skyrocketing. But also, let me tell you, like pre-diabetic and type 2 diabetes is one of the easiest, to heal within, I would say, less than 2 months, just by nutrition and lifestyle. And then in green, we see cancer is rising. And by the way, since 2020, we have $1.5 million new cancer cases every single year. And then in gray, you see heart attack and stroke and so on. And the healthcare spending on chronic diseases, 90% of all the healthcare spending we spend on chronic diseases. We spend $4 trillion a year. And as you can imagine, that's a huge financial burden on our financial system. For the first time in history, America is also, we have the sickest children. And some of the chronic conditions very common these days is ADHD. 1 in 9 kids today have ADHD, and it's rising year after year. We have 15 million children are obese. I'm not talking about a little bit overweight like I used to be. I'm talking about morbidly obese. And then the child mortality also is going up every year. I mean, this is the data from 2022. 3.1% in infant death. That shouldn't even happen, right? And then 12% increase between 1 and 4. And 7% increase between 5 and 14. As you can imagine, the FDA, the government, there's a lot of pressure, because why do we have the sickest children? Why do children, in such a young age dying? Well, the FDA had a lot of pressure, and they had to come up with a solution. You would think they would educate the parents and the children about lifestyle nutrition. No, they teamed up with Big Pharma, and this is mind-blowing for me. They approved statin drugs for children. This just happened, this year. Okay, let me explain what that means, statin drugs for children. Cholesterol-lowering drugs. What they do, they're important. Cholesterol is essential for life. It gets so demonized, for heart attacks, but we know, now that is not the truth or the full truth. Cholesterol is essential for healthy brain function. Your brain needs cholesterol for memory and for new tasks. 60% of your brain is made out of fat. It's the fattiest organ, in the body. And 30% out of that is cholesterol. So I would think that cholesterol might be important. And also think about it this way. Your first nutrition you consume as an infant is, cholesterol. It's fatty acids and stuff from the mother milk. There's a lot of cholesterol in there, and it's important for hormone function and for brain function. I can actually give you a perfect example. One of my patients, his doctor convinced him to get on statin drugs, even though I told him, it's not needed, but he got convinced. And so he was on it for 2 weeks, and every day he goes on his walk, around the block. But one day he didn't return. And so the wife was all concerned. Oh my God, he's always coming back after like an hour. What's happened to him? So they called the cops. They were looking for him. And sure enough, 2 hours later, they found him wandering around. He had complete memory loss. He had complete amnesia. He didn't know his own name. He couldn't recognize his wife. And he had no clue where he was. And then after he got off, after a few days, then his memory slowly came back. But believe me, he's not going to take the statin drugs anymore. And then we have Ozempic for children. I'm sure you guys know semaglutide, Ozempic, which is very common for weight loss. But most people don't know it's a peptide, and how does it work? Well, the way it works is it slows down the gastric emptying. So in other words, the food stays in your stomach, for much longer. But the problem with that is, imagine our entire digestive system from our mouth down to the anus is 35 feet, long. So it's like a long tube, and each section has, is timed, and it's like a conveyor belt, right? Each section has its job. And when the food stays in the stomach for too long, what can happen is that the nutrients get destroyed because we have hydrochloric acid in the stomach, and if the timing is off and it stays in the acid for too long, then some of the nutrients get destroyed, and you have nutrient deficiency, and also bad breath. And then a new study just came out about Ozempic. That was interesting. They just found out for every pound on Ozempic you lose, 1/3 is fat and 2/3 is muscles. And when you Google Ozempic face, you can see that it's like the death face, right? Because they don't lose just fat, they also lose a lot of muscle in the face, and they look like they're dying. Now, again, I'm not demonizing it. If somebody's 300 or 400 pounds and that's the only choice, sure, go for it. But for somebody that wants to just lose 20 pounds or 30 pounds, no, absolutely not. And for kids in the development, absolutely not. And then, of course, to make it even worse, the FDA approved gastric bypass surgery for obese children, which means, make a small incision to the stomach, they put a band around the stomach, shrink it, and then, of course, automatically you're going to eat less. And again, I keep repeating myself. All this can be completely avoided by just education about nutrition. And now it's getting serious. Construction worker and the suicide rate. So you're 10 times higher, as a male construction worker to commit suicide versus the general population. And a lot of that can contribute to a lot of things, but one of the main things is poor nutrition, substance abuse, stress, and job insecurity. Poor nutrition is 100% truth. I witnessed it myself. I know it. I saw it. And substance abuse, that falls under alcohol, cigarettes, painkillers, amphetamines, because the work is hard, so they like to take Adderall to have extra energy, or real amphetamine. And also the stress, because in construction, everything has to be, timed, has to be done on a certain, projects, and job insecurity. I saw that with my dad, if the construction firm he was working with, if they haven't gotten a new contract, sometimes temporarily, he got laid off. Or in the winter in Austria, construction workers don't work for like 2-3, months. But we have government support, that helps, because in the winter when it snows, you can't really work. So working days are lost in the industry each year due to mental health. Let me ask you a question. Do you think a construction worker, who works in construction? Like a real man, right? Big ego, and it's like, of course, I'm not gonna, the tough guys, right? Do you think they would actually ask for help if they have, any mental, issues? I can only bring up the example of my dad, my uncle, my grandpa. Hell no. They're so stubborn. They would never, my dad is the perfect example. He would rather slowly die before he would admit that there's something wrong with him. And if my dad, is like that, I can only imagine many construction workers feel the same way. Instead of asking for help, they're just being stubborn. And then if it gets to a point where there's no way to return, they might do something they shouldn't have done.